Chapter 2751. Ever since Yun Ting came out of seclusion and acknowledged a brother-in-law, the matter had been left unsettled. Although Wang Dong and the others couldn't bear to see Kitsune suffer, they couldn't do anything in the face of Su Zimo, who was almost invincible in the consolidation stage. Everyone could only pray that Bai Mingshui would retreat in the face of difficulties and rein in the horse at the edge of the cliff. Kitsune was so talented in swordsmanship that no one wanted to see her waste her precious time on Wu Dao's cultivation. In the blink of an eye, 3 years had passed. For the past 3 years, Su Zimo had been staying in Bai Mingshui's cave abode without leaving. The consolidation stage perfected immortals of the 8 sword peaks knew that they couldn't defeat him, so no one came to challenge him. He had a peaceful life. While teaching Bai Mingshui, he maintained his own cultivation. Finally, one day, Su Zimo felt the opportunity to break through. In fact, the true yuan in his body had been accumulated to the peak 2 years ago. He was just waiting for the right time. Kitsune felt something and woke up from her cultivation state. She quickly activated the immortal formation in the cave residence. This immortal formation was completed by Su Zimo a year ago. It was to prevent Qinglian's bloodline from leaking when he broke through. Su Zimo slowly raised his head and looked up. Above his head, there was only the thick stone wall of the cave residence. He couldn't see anything at all. However, Su Zimo's eyes seemed to be able to see through the layers of void. He saw the sky outside the cave residence, the firmament of the sword realm, and the black and yellow of heaven and earth. In those clear eyes, there was a faint reflection of the bright starry sky. There was the inverted Milky Way, the flow of time, and the alternation of time and space. At this moment, Su Zimo's spirit, with the power of the Tao fruit, seemed to break through the layers of obstacles and connect with the vast universe, creating a certain resonance. In Su Zimo's sea of consciousness, a sparkling fruit spun slowly, exuding a powerful aura. And as time passed, this aura was still rising rapidly. At this moment, it was as if everything had disappeared. Even Su Zimo's physical body had disappeared. In the vast world, there was only one sparkling and resplendent Tao fruit left. Be it the immortal sex, the Buddhist sex, or the fiend sex, the only difference was their nature, Tao hearts and mental states. However, the profoundness of the Tao techniques were largely the same. When he was in the lower realm, immortals, Buddhas, and devils all talked about the Tao of pills. This was the first time he had broken free from the shackles of heaven and earth, and his lifespan had increased to 500 years. After that, there was the saying of Dharma characteristics. The most important core of the Tao of immortals, Buddhists, and devils was to comprehend, communicate, and establish a connection with the heaven and earth. A cosmic form was formed by borrowing the power of the heavens and the earth. In the lower realms, cultivators could only comprehend minor kiliacosms. After ascending to the upper realm, cultivators would be able to comprehend a broader, more complete, and more boundless middle realm. The so-called celestial being stage was when the cultivator resonated with heaven and earth through the Tao fruit. A Tao fruit was the crystallization of the essence of a cultivator's cultivation. When this resonance occurred, it was equivalent to the Tao fruit being recognized by this vast world, and the power in the Tao fruit would increase exponentially. At the same time, the vast power in the Tao fruit would be fed back to the cultivator's body, allowing the true immortal who had stepped into the celestial being stage to be greatly improved, be it the physical body, bloodline, or primordial spirit. The process of stepping into the celestial being stage lasted for an entire day. Su Zimo's aura was also increasing continuously. Just as immortal King Ling Long had expected, the 12th grade Qinglian was not the end, but only the starting point of Qinglian's creation. The qi and blood of Qinglian's true body were still increasing, and there was no upper limit at all. The cultivation of his primordial spirit was still far ahead of his own cultivation realm. After stepping into the celestial being stage, Qinglian's primordial spirit had already reached the perfected true immortal stage, which was the Dongshu stage of the true self stage. The true self stage was divided into 4 small stages, and the reason why they were so clear and corresponded to different names was that there was a huge difference in power between the 4 small stages. Since ancient times, it was very rare for geniuses of the primordial spirit stage to be one small stage ahead of the true self stage. However, Su Zimo's Qinglian's primordial spirit was 2 whole small stages ahead of his own cultivation. During the process of Su Zimo breaking through to the celestial being stage, he emitted a huge amount of true yuan energy, which filled Kitsun's cave abode. Moreover, during the process of communicating with the world, the resonance was so strong that even the immortal formation set up in the cave abode could not withstand it, and cracks appeared on it. A wisp of the true yuan aura of the green lotus true body leaked out through these cracks. At this moment, Su Zimo opened his eyes, took a deep breath, and swallowed all the primordial qi in the northern underworld cave abode. Kitsun stayed by Su Zimo's side and did not leave his side at all. For an entire day, she was lucky enough to witness the entire process of Su Zimo's breakthrough. This kind of close observation and feeling was too rare. That mysterious process of comprehending and communicating with the heavens and earth was extremely mysterious, and it touched her deeply. Su Zimo's breakthrough this time was also a great opportunity for Kitsun. It directly made Kitsun feel the opportunity to step into the true martial realm. And the wisp of true yuan that leaked out from Kitsun's cave abode drifted and merged into the sword slaughtering peak. On the peak of the sword slaughtering peak, the peak master was resting with his eyes closed. Suddenly, he seemed to have sensed something and opened his eyes, his gaze landing on a few withered yellow lotus flowers not far away. The peak master of the sword slaughtering peak's expression changed and his gaze froze. At that moment, a few of the withered yellow lotus flowers were growing green. Even though there were no buds, a few spots of green grew on the stems of Qinglian's lotus flowers and new lotus leaves appeared. What's going on? Suddenly, the peak master of the sword slaughtering peak stood up and stared at the few green lotus flowers in surprise and delight. Right then he sensed something and spun around, looking in the direction of Kitsun's cave abode. His eyes shone with a bedazzling sword light. The aura of a heavenly tribulation. Has Kitsun broken through? The peak master of the sword slaughtering peak was shocked and his face was filled with disbelief. In their opinion, Kitsun had gone astray by cultivating the Wu Dao. Even if she cultivated a 9th-level fate wheel and was stronger than those of the same cultivation realm, she would never be able to enter the true martial realm if she could not condense a Dao fruit. But now, the aura of the true one heavenly tribulation could be felt from Kitsun's side. It's done! After the initial shock, the peak master of the sword slaughtering peak was overjoyed. No matter what, as long as Kitsun attracted the true one heavenly tribulation, there was hope for her to become a perfected immortal. Moreover, what made the peak master of the sword slaughtering peak even more excited was that he felt that he had found the reason for the revival of the lotus flowers. It must be Kitsun. Kitsun had just broken through and was about to attract the true one heavenly tribulation, but the lotus flowers on the peak had already revived. How could there be such a coincidence in the world? How could there be such an auspicious sign when Kitsun was breaking through? What kind of momentum was this? At this rate, after Kitsun's heavenly tribulation was over, all the Qinglian flowers on the peak would probably revive and bloom on the sword slaughtering peak again. The peak master of the sword slaughtering peak even suspected that Kitsun was the reincarnation of the Emperor Immortal Slayer. Heaven's will, heaven's will. The peak master of the sword slaughtering peak was emotional as he muttered to himself, "Heaven is protecting the sword world." Chapter 2752. 5 Elements Sword Peak. The peak master of 5 Elements Sword Peak suddenly reached out and plucked a ball of light from the void. He touched it with his divine consciousness and received the news inside. Kitsun broke through and attracted the truth one heavenly tribulation? The peak master of 5 Elements Sword Peak was shocked. He wouldn't have believed it if the news hadn't come from the sword slaughtering peak master. The peak master of 5 Elements Sword Peak pondered for a while and decided to announce the news. Cultivators who wanted to watch Kitsun undergo the tribulation could head to the sword slaughtering peak. At the same time, the other 6 peak masters also received the news from the sword slaughtering peak master. Kitsun can also attract the truth one heavenly tribulation by cultivating that Wu Dao? As far as I know, Kitsune can't condense a Dao fruit with the 9 fate wheels she cultivated, right? How can she enter the Truth One realm without a Dao fruit? I'm not sure. Since Brother Lu sent the news, it shouldn't be wrong. Let's go and take a look. The other 7 peak masters were doubtful and didn't believe it. However, the 7 of them still chose to announce the news. As for the cultivators of the other peak masters, it was up to them to decide who would be willing to watch. Generally speaking, when a sword cultivator of the sword realm underwent the Truth One heavenly tribulation, the other sword cultivators could watch from the side. However, if the Truth One heavenly tribulation was only 5 or 6 levels, it wasn't attractive to most sword cultivators. If it was 7 levels, it would attract many cultivators. For example, Yun Ting's tribulation back then was so grand that almost half of the true immortals of the 8 sword cultivation peaks came. Many sword cultivators who were in seclusion came out at the last minute. Have you heard? Kitsune of the sword slaughtering peak is going to undergo the tribulation. Really? Her cultivation path is completely different from ours. I wonder how many levels of tribulation she can attract. She's so talented in sword Dao. Her tribulation won't be too weak. That's not necessarily true. The Wu Dao she cultivates was created by a lower realm cultivator. How can it be compared to the immortal, Buddhist, and demon Dao techniques that have been passed down through the ages? In my opinion, her Truth One heavenly tribulation might not even be 5 heavenly tribulation. After the news spread, it caused a huge commotion among the 8 sword peaks. Firstly, Kitsune was considered a celebrity in the 8 great sword peaks, and many sword cultivators secretly admired her. Secondly, Kitsune practiced Wu Dao. Many swordsmen were curious. Kitsune was practicing Wu Dao? How many levels of heavenly tribulation could he attract? Many cultivators set off one after another, passing through the teleportation formation of their respective sword peaks. He went to the sword-slaying peak to watch. Yun Ting also came out of seclusion and looked in the direction of the sword-slaying peak. Thinking of the battle with Su Zimo 3 years ago? He snorted softly. Fortunately, I didn't have to wait for too long. What level can a disciple trained by Su Zimo reach? Wait for junior sister Baiming to finish her tribulation? I'll fight her? I'll beat her until she's convinced. You abducted my sister, so I'll abduct your disciple? We're even. While speaking, Yun Ting also set off for the Supreme Sword Peak's teleportation formation. At the same time, Gong Sunyu, Sword Immortal Tai Lai, Yi Wuchen, Xinyu, Li Shui, Qin Zhong, and Monk Ju Jian also arrived at the sword-slaying peak. At this time, Kitsune's cave abode was 1,000 miles wide. It was listed as a forbidden area. 10 Immortal King experts from the sword-slaying peak came out and guarded the 10 nodes around it. No one was allowed to step in to prevent accidents and disturb Kitsune's tribulation. 1,000 miles away, in the sky and on the ground, it was densely packed with people. Heavenly tribulation of Truth One? It had already started. How is it? Qin Zhong was the last to arrive. He looked at Wang Dong and the others and asked, "Which level of tribulation is it?" "It's the 3rd level now." Wang Dong answered in a low voice, looking at the figure in the middle of the tribulation with a serious expression. Qin Zhong chuckled and said, "I didn't expect Sister Baiming to attract the heavenly tribulation of Truth One even though she hasn't condensed a Dao fruit. Her master was right." Wang Dong and the others didn't say anything. They looked at Kitsune, who was in the middle of the tribulation, with a strange expression. Qin Zhong followed everyone's gaze and looked at the center of the tribulation. He couldn't help but change his expression. At this time, the 3rd tribulation had already reached the 9th level. Kitsune's surroundings had formed a sea of blue lightning. It was dazzling and set off monstrous waves. The momentum was terrifying. However, Kitsune was still standing in the same place, motionless. She didn't even take out her weapon. This, Qin Zhong was secretly shocked and couldn't help but ask, "Sister Baiming is going through the tribulation like this?" Wang Dong said, "Sister Baiming's body is indeed strong because she cultivates the Wu Dao. As far as I know, in the history of the 8 major sword peaks, there are very few heavenly talents who can withstand the first 3 heavenly tribulations with their bodies." The closest one is Brother Yun of the Extreme Sword Peak. While everyone was talking, the third tribulation was over, and the fourth tribulation was coming. Kitsune still didn't defend herself and went through the tribulation with her body. That was Su Zimo's request for her. Wu Dao used his body as the world and cultivated continuously. The process of tribulation transcendence was also a form of cultivation, and it was a rare opportunity. That was the only way to unleash the full potential of one's body and bloodline to the greatest extent. Boom, boom, boom. Amidst everyone's exclamations, Kitsune endured the first 4 heavenly tribulations. Of course, it wasn't easy for Kitsune to endure it. There were already some wounds on her body, and she was charred by the heavenly tribulations. She looked a little wretched. In the blink of an eye, the 5th heavenly tribulation arrived. Kitsune still didn't release any mystic skills or sword to defend. Is Sister Baiming crazy? Qin Zhong couldn't help but say, if she continues to endure like this, she'll be severely injured. How can she withstand the subsequent heavenly tribulations? Sword Immortal Tai Lai sighed as well. Previously, Brother Yun Ting endured the 5th heavenly tribulation with his body and almost died. Wang Dong and the others looked nervous and didn't say a word. Boom, boom, boom. Chapter 2753. What a strong life force. The Peak Masters on the sword slaughtering peak could not help but exclaim when they saw this scene. This doesn't seem to be Kitsune's recovery ability. Someone must have sealed a huge amount of life force in her body in advance. Who could have such a strong life force and seal it in another person's body? Even we can't do such a thing. The 8 Peak Masters looked at each other. The sword-slaughtering Peak Master's gaze instinctively fell on the green-robed cultivator in the crowd and murmured, "Could it be him?" To be honest, the sword-slaughtering Peak Master did not take this person from the Heaven Realm seriously at first. He was just a true immortal in the Unity stage. Because he was worried that Kitsune would be held back by this person, the sword-slaughtering Peak Master even looked down on him. However, when he saw that Kitsune had a chance to become a true immortal, the sword-slaughtering Peak Master's opinion of this person gradually changed. At this moment, he even guessed that the person who sealed Kitsune's life force was this Su Zhu. Of course, the person who could do such a thing was Su Zimo. Looking at Kitsune, who was struggling to stand up, Su Zimo sighed softly. Although they both cultivated Wu Dao, Kitsune's body and bloodline were far inferior to Wu Dao's original body. Firstly, the original body created Wu Dao and was considered the ancestor of Wu Dao. Secondly, Wu Dao's original body's martial soul was a flame that constantly tempered his flesh and blood. It could also smelt divine powers and secret techniques and fuse them into his flesh and blood. Thirdly, the two of them had different experiences. Wu Dao's original body was not only a body of flesh and blood, but also a furnace that had smelted too many divine powers, secret techniques, and forbidden secret techniques. Kitsune's martial soul, on the other hand, was a sword. Kitsune's greatest advantage was her sword Dao. Baiming Xue's physical body and bloodline were far inferior to the Green Lotus true body. Back then, when Qinglian's true body went through the heavenly tribulation, she stood still on the spot and endured the first 6 true 1 heavenly tribulations with her mortal body. She was unharmed. Moreover, Qinglian's true body also possessed a terrifying self-healing ability. Seeing that the 6th tribulation was about to descend, Su Zimo called out, "Dark North, make your move." He had once told Kitsune that the more heavenly tribulations he could endure with his physical body, the more beneficial it would be for Wu Dao's cultivation. But now, he saw that Kitsune had reached her limit. If he continued to transcend the tribulation, it was very likely that he would fall in the 6th tribulation. Kitsune turned her head and looked at Su Zimo from afar. Her gaze was firm and unyielding as she gently shook her head. This was her choice. Rumble. The 6th heavenly tribulation descended. Kitsune stomped her feet and soared into the skies. She was like an unsheathed sword that shone with a cold and bedazzling gleam as she charged towards the heavenly tribulation. Boom! Kitsune collided with the heavenly tribulation and fell rapidly, crashing heavily onto the ground. She coughed out mouthfuls of blood. However, she did not retreat, fear, or submit. Instead, she continued to charge forward with an indomitable will. That was Wu Dao. That was Kitsun's sword Dao. It was just like back in Tianhuang Mainland's Dark North town. Even though her dantian was shattered and her clansmen were bullied, she did not submit, admit defeat, or give up. No one could shake her willpower. The heavenly tribulation could penetrate her chest, but it could not penetrate her sword heart. At that instant, the 8 peak leaders at the top of the mountain were startled. The Zenith Heaven Sword stele was erected by the great Emperor of all heaven in the past and was engraved with the forbidden secret manuals passed down by the great Emperor. Ever since the Zenith Heaven Sword stele was erected, it had only rung twice. The first time was when the great Emperor of all heaven resonated with the Zenith Heaven Sword stele when he became a great Emperor. The second time was when the immortal Slayer Emperor created the 3 great sword arts when he was still an immortal king. They gave birth to supreme divine abilities and resonated with the Zenith Heaven Sword stele. And now it was the third time. Kitsune had not created any divine abilities or secret manuals, nor had she become a great emperor. However, the will of Wu Dao and the spirit of Sword Dao that she had just displayed had received the Zenith Heaven Sword stele's approval and resonated with it. Immediately after, the swords on the waists, backs, and storage bags of all the sword cultivators in Sword World began to tremble involuntarily. The sword stele resonated with the 10,000 swords. The Zenith Heaven Sword stele had been awakened by Kitsune and was emitting sword hums to support her. At that moment, Kitsune's aura reached its peak. Chapter 2754. After the Daluo sword stele rang out, a wave of excitement and restlessness came from the depths of the Myriad Sword Palace, inadvertently emitting a few strands of terrifying aura. On the peak of Sword Slaughtering Peak, the 8 peak masters looked in the direction of the Myriad Sword Palace with smiles and gratification. The other sword cultivators couldn't sense it, but the 8 of them could sense that the imperial emperors of the Myriad Sword Palace had been alarmed by the commotion here. Among them, there were even a few old fellows who had awakened. Generally speaking, sword cultivators of the sword world could only enter the Myriad Sword Palace to continue cultivating after reaching the Emperor realm. I didn't expect that even those people would be alarmed. The 5 Elements Sword Peak Master sighed. The Daluo sword stele has only rung 3 times. How can those people be unmoved? The Demon Sword Peak Master said. The Overlord Sword Peak Master laughed. Those old fellows are really good at enduring. They still can't put down their airs as imperial emperors and refuse to show up. Even if they don't show up, they'll still be watching Kitsune's tribulation from the Myriad Sword Palace and protect her. Kitsune's tribulation this time is truly the center of attention. I'm looking forward to seeing how many levels of tribulation she'll attract. To be able to obtain the recognition of the Daluo sword stele, do you think she'll attract 9 by 9? As soon as he said this, the 8 peak masters were all shocked. Their eyes were filled with anticipation. The legendary 9 by 9 heavenly tribulation. They had lived for hundreds of thousands of years, but they had never seen 9 by 9 heavenly tribulation. In the current Myriad Sword Palace, there was an imperial emperor who had attracted 9 by 9 heavenly tribulation. However, that was several million years ago. One had to know that even Lin Xuanjun and Yun Ting, who were extremely talented in the sword Dao in this life, had only attracted 8 by 9 heavenly tribulation. The Sword Slaughtering Peak Master said in a deep voice, the number of heavenly tribulations doesn't prove anything. Most of the imperial emperors in the 3,000 worlds were only 7 by 9 or 8 by 9 back then. It'll be best if Kitsune can attract 9 by 9 heavenly tribulation. Even if it stops at 8 by 9, she'll still be the sword cultivator with the greatest potential in this life of the sword world. The heavenly tribulation continued. The Daluo sword stele emitted a sword hum, which then caused the 10,000 swords to hum in unison. Kitsune faced the 9th heavenly tribulation and slashed forward. In the eyes of the crowd, Kitsune's figure seemed to have disappeared. What replaced it was a long sword that seemed to be able to pierce through everything. Boom! Under Kitsune's perseverance, she finally relied on her physical body to withstand the first 6 heavenly tribulations. And with the help of the power of the first 6 heavenly tribulations, Her true Wu Dao body was also rapidly being reconstructed. Wu Dao's runes mixed with the lightning of the heavenly tribulation, continuously fusing into his body and bloodline. It stimulated the potential of this body. He didn't give Kitsune much time to breathe. The seventh tribulation arrived in the blink of an eye. This time, Kitsune didn't choose to take the attack head-on, but instead used the secret arts she had learned over the years. Facing the 79 heavenly tribulations. Boom, boom, boom. Under the destructive thunder and lightning, a figure radiating boundless sharpness charged at the lightning. She challenged the heavenly tribulation and displayed an unshakable will. The seventh tribulation ended, and the tribulation clouds in the sky still hadn't dissipated. No surprise? The eighth tribulation descended. The other Peak Masters were a little confused and did not know why the Peak Master of the Ultimate Sword Peak suddenly left. Not long after, the Peak Master of the Ultimate Sword Peak appeared again. Beside her was a beautiful woman with a cold expression. She was the #1 sword immortal among the true disciples, Lin Xuanzhen. Master, what are you doing? Lin Xuanzhen asked indifferently. She was initially in seclusion, but the Peak Master of the Ultimate Sword Peak barged in and brought her here forcefully. The Peak Master of the Ultimate Sword Peak pointed ahead and said in a deep voice, "The heavenly tribulation is rare in the world. You shouldn't want to miss it." Suddenly, Lin Xuanzhen's mind stirred. Heavenly tribulation? She knew very well what the heavenly tribulation meant. Legend had it that the last tribulation of the heavenly tribulation would descend with a supreme divine power. Theoretically speaking, anyone who witnessed this supreme divine power would have a chance to cultivate it successfully. Up until now, she had only cultivated the immortal slaying sword to the quasi-supreme level and had yet to achieve a true supreme divine power. She had comprehended it for many years and felt that it was still lacking some charm. If she could witness the supreme divine power, the immortal slaying sword, she would definitely be able to comprehend its mysteries and succeed. Of course, the prerequisite was that the ultimate divine power of the heavenly tribulation was the immortal slaying sword. Chapter 2755. I wonder what kind of supreme divine power will descend? Supreme Sword Peak's Peak Master murmured softly. Ultimate Sword Peak's Peak Master replied, "Supreme divine powers are extremely rare and there have only been slightly more than 10 of them throughout history. Since Kitsune cultivates the Tao of the sword, there's a high chance that the immortal slaying sword will descend." Kitsune, Lin Xuanzhen murmured softly. She was focused on cultivating the Tao of the sword and rarely paid attention to the people and matters of the 8 sword peaks. As such, she was still unfamiliar with that name. As though he had discovered something, Lin Xuanzhen frowned slightly and suddenly asked, "Junior Sister Baiming hasn't condensed a Tao fruit yet. Why is there a heavenly tribulation descending?" Ultimate Sword Peak's Peak Master replied, "It said that Kitsune cultivates a dermic formulation known as the Wu Dao. It's different from the immortals, Buddhas and fiends." Wu Dao? Why haven't I heard of it before? Lin Xuanzhen asked again. Ultimate Sword Peak's Peak Master replied, "This Wu Dao was created by Kitsune's master in the lower realm. He's truly an anomaly and created a Dao technique as such. To think that he could cultivate it to this level as well." As they conversed, the 9th heavenly tribulation had already descended. The first 3 heavenly tribulations of the 9th heavenly tribulation are similar to the previous 8 heavenly tribulations. However, the level of power is much higher. If you want to survive it, you'll have to release your bloodline phenomenon. Standing on the spot, Kitsune recalled what Su Zimo told her about the 9th heavenly tribulation and gripped her sword tightly with a resolute gaze. "Fight." Kitsune flicked her sword and let out a hum. Her blood chi rumbled and the sound of a tsunami could be heard. Immediately after, the roar of a dragon and elephant echoed from her bloodline and shook the world. That was Wu Dao's 9th transformation, the power of dragon and elephant. Divine dragons circled and divine elephants appeared, protecting Kitsune's side. When they collided with the first heavenly tribulation, a deafening bang was heard. There were thousands of people who cultivated the Wu Dao in Tianhuang mainland alone. But when it came to Wu Dao, no one could reach Kitsune's level of achievement. It was because when Kitsune first started practicing Wu Dao, it was Su Zimo who personally taught her and helped her lay down a perfect foundation. Wu Dao's sixth transformation was able to condense the Qi and blood gene Dan. However, Su Zimo allowed Kitsune to continue cultivating until she reached Wu Dao's ninth transformation. Only then did she begin to condense her martial spirit. Kitsune wouldn't have been able to survive the 99 heavenly tribulations if she hadn't laid a solid foundation back then. The second heavenly tribulation descended. The divine dragon and divine elephant were just manifestations of Wu Dao, not her bloodline manifestations. They had already been destroyed by the first tribulation. Kitsune channeled her blood qi to its limits and a dark and deep ocean appeared behind her, emitting a bone-chilling coldness. The Northern Sea. Kitsune released her bloodline phenomenon and withstood the second heavenly tribulation head-on. The Northern Sea was smashed into pieces by the heavenly tribulation and was almost dried up. Kitsune spat out a mouthful of blood. Although the Northern Sea dissipated most of the power of the heavenly tribulation, a portion of it still surged into her body. Before she could catch her breath, the third heavenly tribulation descended. Kitsune pursed her lips tightly and endured the pain as she continued channeling her bloodline. A gigantic shadow appeared in the initially dried-up Northern Sea. Suddenly, the shadow broke out of the sea and charged towards the third heavenly tribulation. It was a massive creature that towered in midair and covered the skies. Opening its gigantic mouth, it let out an ancient and terrifying aura. Kuan race. Many sword cultivators recognized the background of the massive creature and exclaimed, "Boom!" The third heavenly tribulation dissipated. Kitsune's bloodline phenomenon was completely shattered as well. Coughing out mouthfuls of blood, her aura was weak and she could no longer hold on. The fourth heavenly tribulation is called the bloodline tribulation and it's used directly on your bloodline. Kitsune recalled what Su Zimo said to her and tried her best to compose herself to withstand the impact of the bloodline tribulation. Right in front of everyone, Kitsune's body trembled continuously and curled up, as though she was enduring immense pain. As time went by, Bai Mingshui's figure began to fade away and mysteriously disappeared. What remained in place was a dark and profound longsword. The sword emitted a strange power and chose to devour the bloodline tribulation instead of resisting it. On the peak, the 8 peak masters of the sword peaks were shocked and their eyes were filled with disbelief. She comprehended a new sword Dao in the process of the tribulation? That should be the case. However, the sword Dao coexists with her bloodline and is not complete and stable yet. Before long, the bloodline tribulation ended. Kitsune's figure appeared once more. After the fourth bloodline tribulation, her injuries did not worsen. Instead, they healed more than half and she was in a much better state. Nobody knew how to deal with the 99 heavenly tribulations better than Su Zimo. That was because he had gone through it twice alone. As for the experiences of the 2 tribulations, he imparted all of them to Kitsune. The subsequent Essence Spirit Tribulation, Dao Heart Tribulation and Karma Tribulation did not pose much of a threat to her as Kitsune withstood them one by one. It was only when the 8th Weapon Tribulation descended that Kitsune suffered immense damage. Kitsune's body was drenched in blood and her body swayed. She barely managed to stand in a pool of blood with the help of her destiny sword. There was only one last heavenly tribulation left. However, everyone knew that the last heavenly tribulation was the most terrifying and fatal. The world turned incomparably oppressive. On the mountain peak, all the sword cultivators in the air held their breaths as they stared unblinkingly at the tribulation cloud in the sky. The last heavenly tribulation was a supreme divine power. Being able to witness it was also a great opportunity for them. Even the powerful auras in the Myriad Swords Palace became incomparably quiet, afraid of disturbing Kitsune. Only the Daluo sword steel was still emitting sword hums as if it was supporting Kitsune. Lin Xuanjun and Yun Ting were also looking forward to the next scene. Suddenly, peach blossoms of various colors floated down from the tribulation cloud in the sky. Chapter 2756. The moment the sword light arrived, Kitsune's body erupted with a towering sword intent. Her murderous aura wreaked havoc in the world. A crimson sword burst out of Kitsune's body and collided with the sword light. Immortal slaying sword. A shout came from the crowd. The 8 peak masters on the mountain peak were also shocked. Although the immortal slaying sword had not reached the level of a supreme theurgy, it had reached the level of a quasi-supreme theurgy. Boom! The 2 sword daos collided. After a long time, the tribulation clouds dispersed. Between heaven and earth, not a sound could be heard. All the sword cultivators, including the immortal kings and the 8 peak masters on the sword slaughtering peak, were stunned in place. They were subdued by the sword intent revealed by the sword. There were no words that could describe the amazement of this sword. Perhaps only those words could describe it. The sky was intoxicated with flowers, and the sword was cold with frost. A new supreme theurgy had descended upon the sword realm because of Kitsune. On the top of the mountain, Lin Xuanzhen's calm eyes were also stirred, and his mind was shaken. Yun Ting clenched his fists with a complicated expression. Although Baiming Shui had attracted the 9x9 heavenly tribulation, this alone was not enough to affect him much. The heavenly tribulation was just a facade. A cultivator with an 8x9 heavenly tribulation might not lose to a 9x9 heavenly tribulation cultivator in the future. It was said that the most powerful immortal emperor in the world, the blood butterfly demon emperor of the great wasteland domain, had only attracted a 5x9 heavenly tribulation when she reached the true self realm. Generally speaking, a living being could attract a 6x9 heavenly tribulation at the very least after condensing a Tao fruit. However, the blood butterfly demon emperor was so weak that she did not even attract a 6x9 heavenly tribulation. Later on, she still stood at the peak of the upper realm and looked down on all living beings. The number of heavenly tribulations at the true self realm was 1 level lower than Kitsune's. This could not shake Yun Ting's Tao heart at all. However, when he saw the sword just now, he was deeply shocked. He could not describe the terror of this sword. He only knew that if he and Kitsune were in each other's shoes, he would not be able to block this sword. Everyone's eyes fell on Kitsune. Her condition looked extremely bad. After all, her immortal slaying sword was only at the quasi-supreme level. And the last of the 99 heavenly tribulations was a truly supreme divine ability. Kitsune's life force was weak, and even the essence spirit in her consciousness was severely injured and was on the verge of shattering. It's over. Sensing all this, many sword cultivators shook their heads and sighed. A trace of regret flashed through Yun Ting's eyes. At this moment, a green figure flashed and arrived beside Kitsune. It was Su Zimo. Su Zimo stepped forward with a solemn expression. He picked up the unconscious Kitsune and prepared to return to the cave residence. The next moment, the void beside him suddenly cracked open, and an extremely powerful aura descended. The peak master of the sword slaughtering peak had arrived. Put him down and leave him to me. The peak master of the sword slaughtering peak blocked Su Zimo's path. Sword light flashed in his eyes, emitting a powerful aura as he charged towards Su Zimo. No! Su Zimo's expression was fearless as he spoke slowly. His tone was firm and unquestionable. Even in the face of an immortal king expert, Su Zimo did not avoid his gaze at all. The surrounding sword cultivators opened their mouths slightly. At this moment, everyone seemed to have an illusion that Su Zimo was not at a disadvantage in terms of aura when facing the peak master of the sword slaughtering peak. Who is that? On the peak, Lin Xuanzhen's gaze landed on Su Zimo as he suddenly asked. The ultimate sword peak's peak master said, "He is Kitsune's master in the lower realm." Lin Xuanzhen nodded slightly. Sigh. The 5 elements sword peak's peak master suddenly sighed. Brother Lu, you're too anxious. Kitsune is so severely injured that even her essence spirit is on the verge of shattering. Even the Emperor Lords of the Myriad Swords Palace can't do anything, let alone us. The illusory sword peak's peak master nodded as well. If they could save her, those old fellows would have appeared long ago. Amit Ba. The Zen sword peak's peak master said, "We should persuade Brother Lu lest he injures Kitsune's master in a moment of rashness. After all, this matter has nothing to do with that person." What did you say? When the peak master of the sword-slaughtering peak saw that Su Zimo actually dared to oppose him, he could not help but feel enraged. The sword light in his eyes became even sharper and was about to spurt out. "Can you save her?" Su Zimo asked with a calm expression. The peak master of the sword-slaughtering peak was stumped and stunned on the spot. Indeed, he could not save Kitsune. However, he truly did not want Kitsune to die just like that, even if he had to try all his methods. "Since you can't save her, don't block the way." "Right then," Su Zimo said, "I'll save my disciple. Don't disturb me for a month." With that said, Su Zimo carried Kitsune and headed towards his cave abode. When he heard that, the peak master of the sword-slaughtering peak could not believe it. However, a glimmer of hope reignited in his heart, and he instinctively stepped aside. In the blink of an eye, Su Zimo carried Kitsune and disappeared from everyone's sight. The peak master of the sword-slaughtering peak stood on the spot with a conflicted expression. After pondering for a long time, he took a deep look in the direction that Su Zimo and Su Zimo left and turned to leave. On the peak, Lin Xuanjun had already left and returned to Ultimate Sword Peak to continue his seclusion. Although she did not see the descent of the immortal slaying sword this time round, the supreme mystic power of the sword Dao still shocked her immensely. She wanted to enter seclusion as soon as possible to absorb and refine the insights she had just gained. "Brother Lu, let him try," the peak master of the 5 elements sword peak sighed. "If you take Kitsune away, you'll probably only be able to watch her die in front of you in the end." The peak master of the ultimate sword peak said, "That's right. Even if he can't save her, Kitsune is still his disciple. He should be the one to send Kitsune on her final journey." The peak master of the sword-slaughtering peak remained silent. He looked at Kitsune's cave abode with a hint of anticipation in his eyes. After returning to his cave abode, Su Zimo immediately activated the surrounding immortal formations and shielded the entire cave abode. Along the way, he had already checked Kitsune's injuries from head to toe. Kitsune's injuries were indeed extremely severe and her life was hanging by a thread. The most terrifying thing was that Kitsune's essence spirit, which was the sword soul in her spirit consciousness, suffered a tremendous impact and was almost shattered. However, Su Zimo could clearly tell that the final strike of the 99 heavenly tribulation did not seem to be fatal and even left a trace of life for Kitsune. This was completely different from the situation of his 2 heavenly tribulations back then. Back then, when he attracted the 99 heavenly tribulations twice, the final heavenly tribulation was meant to destroy him. However, at the final moment, when the sword beam entered Kitsune's body, it actually left a trace of life and saved Kitsune's life temporarily. As long as there was a trace of life, Su Zimo would have a way to save Kitsune. Relying on the bloodline of the rank 12 creation Qinglian, he could cast Lotus Birth Finger continuously for a month and heal Kitsune's injuries. As for the sword soul injury that was the most difficult to resolve, he still had some fretless fruits in his storage bag that he could feed to Kitsune. If one fruit was not enough, he could feed her too. Coupled with the Buddhist Sutra of the Prajna Nirvana Sutra, he could nourish Kitsune's sword soul continuously. There was a 70% chance that Kitsune would recover to her original state. Only the rank 12 creation Qinglian could save Kitsune, who was on the brink of death, by relying on the incomparably strong vitality in her bloodline. A healed Kitsune would have the chance to comprehend 2 types of supreme sword Dao mystic arts. The world is intoxicated by flowers and the 9 heavens are filled with frost. At the beginning, there was a plot that was not uploaded. Just refresh it. End of chapter. Chapter 2757. After the 99 heavenly tribulations dissipated, many sword cultivators returned to their respective sword peaks. Most of the sword cultivators gained new insights into the Tao of the sword after this viewing. If anyone in the realm could attract the 99 heavenly tribulations, it would be a rare opportunity for all the cultivators in the entire realm. On the peak of Sword Culling Peak, the 8 peak masters gathered here and recalled the scene of Kitsune's tribulation earlier on, lamenting endlessly. If I'm not wrong, Kitsune should have the original scrolls of the 3 sword arts in her storage bag, the ultimate Sword Peak's peak master said in a deep voice. The others were not surprised when they heard that. The power of the 99 heavenly tribulations was way too ferocious. Not only was Kitsune's body severely injured, her storage bag was almost shattered as well. Through the shattered storage bag, the 8 peak masters sensed the aura of the 3 sword arts. Furthermore, it was the most primitive and purest sword chi of the 3 sword arts. The 5 elements Sword Peak's peak master nodded as well. Although her immortal slaying sword hasn't reached the level of a supreme mystic power, it's still quasi-supreme. That charm and sword intent are definitely there. The Sword Culling Peak's peak master said, I've been paying attention to her cultivation situation. At least 3 years ago, she had yet to fuse the 3 sword arts and was unable to condense the immortal slaying sword. The reason why she was able to cultivate the immortal slaying sword should be because she read the original scrolls of the 3 sword arts. The illusory Sword Peak's peak master lamented, Kitsune is truly blessed to be able to obtain the original scrolls of the 3 sword arts. The Sword Culling Peak's peak master was confused. But she has been cultivating in Sword Culling Peak for the past 3 years and has never left at all. How could she have obtained the 3 sword arts? 3 years ago, the 8 peak masters exchanged glances and thought of the same person at the same time. 3 years ago was the time when Su Zhu of the Heaven Realm arrived. Could he have imparted them to Kitsune? If that's the case, he should have cultivated the 3 sword arts as well. The fact that he could impart the original scrolls of the 3 sword arts to Kitsune shows how much he values Kitsune. Even personal disciples might not be able to see the initial copies of the 3 great sword techniques. Not to mention, Su Zimo had directly given the first copies of the 3 major sword techniques to Kitsune. No matter what, the first copies of the 3 great sword arts have been lost for many years. In this life, they have finally returned to the hands of the cultivators of the sword world. If that Su Zhu really did pass on the 3 sword techniques to Kitsune, Brother Liu, you should go meet him and thank him in person. The return of the 3 great sword arts to the sword realm is of great significance. In fact, the peak master of the sword slaughtering peak was well aware of the importance of this matter. However, he was an immortal king after all, while Su Zhu was only a true immortal. He still felt a bit conflicted about thanking Su Zhu in person and couldn't put down his pride. Moreover, Kitsune's life and death were still unknown. Even if the 3 great sword arts returned, he wouldn't be in the mood. The peak master of the sword slaughtering peak said, these are all guesses. If that person really did pass the 3 great sword arts to Kitsune, it's fine for me to thank him. If he can save Kitsune, I'll prepare a huge gift and give it to him with both hands, let alone thanking him. If a sword Tao genius who attracted the 99 heavenly tribulations and gave birth to a new supreme divine power could be revived, he would definitely be the future hope of the sword world. No gift could exchange for that. Time flew. In the blink of an eye, a month had passed. During this period, the sword cultivators of the 8 sword peaks were discussing the 99 heavenly tribulations. Wang Dong and the other sword cultivators of the sword slaughtering peak would wait in front of Kitsune's cave abode every day, hoping for some news from inside. However, the door of the cave abode was always shut and it was quiet inside. Although the peak master of the sword slaughtering peak didn't show up, he would look in that direction from time to time. On this day, the door of the cave abode, which had been closed for a month, slowly opened. A slender and graceful figure gradually walked out from the depths of the cave abode. The sword cultivators guarding outside the cave abode immediately looked in the direction of the sound. When they saw the figure walking out of the cave abode, their eyes widened in shock. Kitsune had come out of closed-door cultivation. This news swept through the 8 sword peaks like a violent storm, causing a huge commotion. Everyone had seen Kitsune's injuries that day. Even immortal kings were helpless. No one had expected that Kitsune would be able to come back to life and recover from her injuries. Wang Dong and the others immediately came to congratulate her when they heard the news. Kitsune entering the true first realm meant that she had become a true disciple of the sword world, just like them. On the mountain peak, the peak master of the sword slaughtering peak, Lu Yun, looked at this scene with excitement and couldn't help but laugh loudly. Haha, the heavens are really protecting our sword world. Lu Yun looked at the withered lotus flowers on the mountain peak and murmured softly, Senior Immortal Slayer, do you see that? Our sword world has given birth to a genius of the 90/9 heavenly tribulation. Although Kitsune's tribulation had ended, the lotus flowers on the mountain peak hadn't recovered their vitality as he'd expected. But seeing Kitsune return unscathed still filled his heart with wild joy. At the same time, the other Sword Peak Masters also received the news. It looks like Sword Slaughtering Peak is going to rise in this generation. Sword Slaughtering Peak has produced a Kitsune, and the 3 sword arts have returned to the sword world. Lu Yun will probably wake up laughing in his dreams. Not necessarily. In this generation, Extreme Sword Peak has Yun Ting, and Solitude Sword Peak has Lin Xuanjun. It's still unknown who will go further on the path of the sword. Among the true disciples of the 8 sword peaks, Kitsune, Yun Ting, and Lin Xuanjun have all cultivated Altus to the level of quasi-supreme combat arts. I wonder who will be the first to comprehend the true form of Altus. Although Kitsune had obtained the supreme combat art, Frost, it didn't mean she'd fully comprehended it. Grasping a supreme combat art was as difficult as ascending to the heavens. Kitsune still had to continue cultivating and comprehending it. She needed time to settle down and find an opportunity. It could only be said that she was the sword cultivator with the greatest chance of comprehending Frost. On the mountain peak, Lu Yun silently looked at Kitsune, who just walked out of her residence and was receiving congratulations from many sword cultivators. After a while, he suddenly sent a message with his consciousness, telling Kitsune to come to Sword Slaughtering Peak. For one, he wanted to see if Kitsune could revive the lotus flowers on the mountain peak. For another, he wanted to know more about the 3 sword arts. It didn't take long for Kitsune to reach the top of Sword Slaughtering Peak. It was her first time here, and a trace of surprise flitted through her eyes when she looked at the vast expanse of withered lotus flowers around her. Disappointment flashed through Lu Yun's eyes. The lotus flowers around her didn't stir at all. Putting the matter aside for the moment, Lu Yun smiled. Kitsune, there's something I want to confirm. Did your master pass down the 3 sword arts to you? Wariness flitted across Kitsune's face at the mention of Su Zimo and the 3 sword arts. Lu Yun smiled. Don't be nervous. Since the 3 sword arts are with you, they belong to you. No one can take them away without your permission. As for your master, I won't harm him either. If he did pass the 3 sword arts to you, I'd have to prepare a gift and thank him in person. Chapter 2758. Kitsune knew that she wouldn't be able to hide this from the Peak Lord of Sword Slayer Peak. She also believed that he'd keep his promise and not harm Su Zimo. She nodded. It was my master who taught me the 3 sword arts. As expected. Lu Yun nodded, but didn't say anything. Since that was the case, he really should pay this Su Zhu a visit and thank her in person. However, he wasn't quite sure what gift to prepare. If the gift was too light, it wouldn't seem important enough and would be rude. However, Su Zhu wasn't a member of the sword world. She was only Kitsun's master in the lower realms. Too heavy a gift would be inappropriate. He couldn't think of a way to prepare a sincere and appropriate thank you gift for the time being. Of course, he had more important things to discuss with Su Zhu. Kitsun had attracted a 9x9 heavenly tribulation and sent down a new combat art of sword Dao. During her tribulation, she'd resonated with the exalted sword steel and assisted her. It wouldn't be an exaggeration to say that Kitsun was one of the sword world's most important true disciples. Although she'd only just stepped into the true first realm, her status in the sword world and importance in the hearts of its experts was no less than that of Lin Xuanzhen and Yun Ting. Kitsun was now a unity true immortal. Her master, Su Zhu, had only just broken through to the celestial realm. Their cultivation levels were about the same. In fact, in Lu Yun's opinion, Kitsun would definitely be able to defeat her master if the restrictions were lifted and they could spar regardless of cultivation level. A genius of the sword world who'd overcome a 9x9 heavenly tribulation and had the opportunity to cultivate 2 combat arts could easily fight those above her level. Thus, the situation between the two was a bit awkward. In Lu Yun's opinion, Su Zhu no longer had the right to continue teaching Kitsun. Kitsun's master had to be an immortal king at the very least. An immortal king's knowledge and understanding of the Tao was far beyond that of a true immortal. Even ordinary immortal kings were a little lacking. Only peak-stage immortal kings like him, the Lord of a Peak, had the qualifications to become Kitsun's master. Furthermore, Kitsun cultivated the way of the sword. Even if Su Zhu had cultivated the 3 major sword techniques, what about him? How could she be better than Kitsun? Since that was the case, what could this person teach Kitsun? Of course, it wasn't appropriate for him to say such things in front of Kitsun. He could vaguely feel it. Was Bai Mingshui extremely respectful towards Su Zhu? Moreover, he was somewhat dependent on her. He wanted to take advantage of this opportunity? Discuss this matter with Su Zhu? What if this person took the initiative to quit? This pair of Kitsun? It was also a better choice. Peak Master? If there's nothing else, I'll take my leave first. Kitsun noticed that Lu Yun was deep in thought. No one knew what he was thinking as he opened his mouth to speak. Lu Yun responded, then asked casually, "Where are you going?" "Extreme Sword Peak." Kitsun responded faintly. Lu Yun seemed to sense something as he caught a trace of sword intent from Kitsun. "What are you going to do there?" "I have a duel with Yun Ting," Kitsun replied. "I'm going to meet him now." "Well." Lu Yun hesitated. "Kitsun, you've just passed your 9x9 heavenly tribulation and recovered from your injuries. You haven't cultivated in the true first realm yet. I suggest that you spend some time in the true first realm and familiarize yourself with the battles between true immortals." Kitsun shook his head. "I'm fighting Yun Ting to test my sword and familiarize myself with the battles between true immortals." Lu Yun was a little exasperated. "You don't have to go straight to Yun Ting if you want to test your sword. You can find a weaker opponent to spar with first." In Lu Yun's opinion, although Kitsun had passed his 9x9 heavenly tribulation, it was hard to say who would win against Yun Ting. Yun Ting's talent in sword Dao was also rare in the world. Moreover, Yun Ting had obtained many sword Dao inheritances and had cultivated each of them to the great accomplishment stage. Moreover, Yun Ting had spent much more time in the true first realm than Kitsun. Kitsun had just entered the true first realm, and her greatest advantage was the opportunity to comprehend 2 combat arts in the future. She'd wasted this advantage by challenging Yun Ting now. More importantly, there was another concern in Lu Yun's heart. Kitsun was cultivating the Wu Dao, after all, and hadn't even manifested a Dao fruit yet. Although she'd entered the true first realm, what were Kitsun's chances of winning against Yun Ting, a true immortal with a Dao fruit and an even purer one? Kitsun seemed to read Lu Yun's mind. I've entered the true first realm as the Wu Dao. If I'm going to fight, then I'm going to find the strongest cultivator in the same realm. I'm sure many of our fellow disciples from the 8 Sword Peaks would like to see Wu Dao's battle strength in the true first realm. That was indeed the case. After learning that Kitsune had emerged from closed-door cultivation, the greatest suspense in the hearts of many sword cultivators was what level Kitsune's battle strength would reach after entering the true first realm with the Wu Dao. After all, heavenly tribulations were only external. If Kitsune couldn't rank in the top 10 among her peers, so what if she attracted a 9x9 heavenly tribulation? It would only prove that the Wu Dao wasn't worth it. Seeing that Kitsune had made up her mind, Lu Yun didn't try to dissuade her any further. He gave Kitsune a brief rundown of some of the trump cards Yun Ting had revealed earlier. After listening to everything, Kitsune turned and headed for the transportation formation, heading straight for Extreme Sword Peak. Lu Yun looked at Kitsune's back in silence. As far as he knew, the Wu Dao was a cultivation method created by a cultivator from the lower realms. It was incomplete and couldn't compare to methods passed down through the ages like the immortals, Buddhas, and demons. If the Wu Dao really was strong, then why didn't Su Zhu, the creator of Wu Dao, continue to cultivate? Lu Yun had been secretly observing Su Zhu for a long time. Her cultivation obviously belonged to the immortals, Buddhas, and demons, and she had a Dao fruit in her consciousness. It'll be good if Kitsune loses. Lu Yun thought for a moment. That would give him even more reason to persuade Su Zhu to let go and allow Kitsune to become his disciple. Mobile app, read. News of Kitsune heading to Extreme Sword Peak to challenge Yun Ting spread like wildfire. The 8 Sword Peaks, which had been quiet for a month, were once again in an uproar. Chapter 2759. The battle between the two monstrous geniuses attracted countless sword cultivators to watch. In the sword realm, it was not easy to see such a top-level battle between monstrous geniuses. For example, Lin Xuanjun was completely unmatched in the same realm. And between Yun Ting and Lin Xuanjun, the difference in cultivation realm was quite large, and they could not spar. Because Kitsune suddenly attracted the 9x9 heavenly tribulation and stepped into the true first realm, it became an unparalleled battle between peers. This battle was not just a battle between Kitsune and Yun Ting. Countless sword cultivators also wanted to see what kind of combat strength the Wu Dao that Kitsune cultivated could unleash at the true first realm. The 8 great sword peaks were in an uproar, but Kitsune's cave abode was abnormally quiet. Su Zimo did not join in the fun. He understood Kitsune and Yun Ting too well. The outcome of this battle between the two did not have much suspense to him. In the past 3 years, most of his energy was placed on Kitsune. When Kitsune stepped into the true martial realm, he also put down a load on his mind and prepared to continue cultivating and comprehending Dao techniques. His cultivation base had risen very quickly, and he had already surpassed Yun Ting. But in reality, he was still far from reaching the upper limit of his combat strength. At present, Su Zimo had already cultivated the immortal vanquishing sword, dragon elephant of many Buddhas, 6 paths of reincarnation, fleeting youth, for heads 8 arms, and 6 fangs divine power to the quasi-supreme level. However, to cultivate the true supreme divine powers, he still needed to continue comprehending. Don't look at the difference of the word quasi-dash. The power of the divine powers was worlds apart. If Su Zimo could cultivate all these divine powers to the supreme divine powers, his combat strength would reach the peak. At that time, with the 6 fangs divine power, 4 heads 8 arms, and the support of the few supreme divine powers, he could not predict what kind of power could erupt. Since ancient times, no one could master so many supreme divine powers at the same time. More than half a day had already passed since Kitsune left. Finally, a sound came from the cave abode's door. Not long after, a figure slowly walked in. Su Zimo opened his eyes and looked over. Kitsune's clothes were a little messy and stained with blood. Her face was pale and her breath was weak. Obviously, she had consumed a lot of energy in this battle and had fought very hard. However, Kitsune's expression remained calm. Her gaze was as sharp as a sword. He won. Su Zimo said. He won. Kitsune nodded. Both master and disciple answered each other without saying much. Su Zimo had already expected this. Naturally, he didn't think much of it, nor was he curious. This was Kitsune's temperament. Even if she won against Yun Ting, she would not show any excitement. Su Zimo closed his eyes and was about to continue cultivating when his heart skipped a beat and he asked out of curiosity, "Is Yunting all right?" Kitsune paused. After a moment of silence, she said, "I won't die." Kitsune's cave abode returned to silence. Su Zimo comprehended Dao techniques while Kitsune recuperated quietly. However, Supreme Sword Peak was in an uproar at that moment. It was bustling with noise and excitement. Kitsune had already returned to her cave abode. However, there were still many sword cultivators gathered at Supreme Sword Peak and none of them left. The battle between the two monster incarnates lasted for more than 4 hours. Everyone witnessed the entire process and the shock on their faces had yet to dissipate. The killing sword Dao displayed by Kitsune and Yun Ting was an eye-opener for everyone present. This gift is very sincere. Don't worry, there's no need to worry. Those of the sword world are open and aboveboard. They won't scheme, at least not to harm you. Su Zimo agreed with Yun Ting. As a peak master and an immortal king, Lu Yun didn't need to go through so much trouble to deal with him. However, he had a nagging feeling that Lu Yun's gift of thanks had other motives. Fellow Taoist, you've cultivated the 3 great sword techniques. I'm sure you'll learn something from Emperor Immortal Slayer's sword intent. You can also give Kitsune some pointers on the sword Dao of slaughter in the future. All right. Su Zimo did not decline and agreed right away. On the peak of Sword Slayer Peak. Apart from Lu Yun's absence, the other 7 peak masters were gathered here, chatting as they sipped tea. I heard that Brother Lu went to give Su Zhu a gift? The Great Sword Peak Master asked. The 5 Elements Sword Peak's Peak Master smiled and said, "That's right. Brother Lu's gift of thanks has a lot of meaning behind it." What do you mean? The Overlord Sword Peak Master was a bit confused. He's very sincere in sending Su Zhu to the back of the mountain to experience Emperor Immortal Slayer's sword intent, the Elemental Sword Peak Master explained. But how can ordinary cultivators comprehend the essence of Emperor Immortal Slayer's sword intent unless they're a genius in sword Dao? That Su Zhu may have practiced the 3 major sword techniques, but can he compare to Bai Ming Shui in swordsmanship? Kitsune's already cultivated Immortal Slayer to quasi-supreme level and still can't break through after sensing Emperor Immortal Slayer's sword intent. How much can Su Zhu possibly comprehend? The other peak masters nodded in agreement. Any sword cultivator of Sword Catcher Peak had the opportunity to sense Emperor Immortal Slayer's sword intent. But how many sword cultivators had actually comprehended Immortal Slayer after so many years? On the other hand, Lin Xuanjun of Great Sword Peak and Yun Ting of Extreme Sword Peak had cultivated Immortal Slayer to quasi-supreme level. If Su Zhu doesn't gain anything from it, he'll understand that he's not qualified to guide Kitsune in Sword Dao, the Illusory Sword Peak Master said. Brother Lu really put a lot of thought into this gift of thanks, the Demonic Sword Peak Master said. The Demonic Sword Peak's Peak Master said, if Su Zhu can recognize her own shortcomings and voluntarily withdraw, she'll be able to preserve her face. Speaking of which, among the true disciples of this generation, Lin Xuanjun, Kitsune, and Yun Ting have all comprehended Immortal Slayer to quasi-supreme level, the Zen Sword Peak Master said. I believe that with their talents, they'll all be able to comprehend the true Immortal Slayer in the end. However, I don't know who'll be the first to grasp this supreme combat art. Why don't we make a bet? The Demonic Sword Peak Master suddenly became interested. I'll bet on Lin Xuanjun. Whether it was the Immortal Dao, Demonic Dao, or Buddhist Dao, he could integrate them into his own cultivation methods and make them his creations. The same went for Sword Dao. Su Zimo's immortal slang was already at the level of a quasi-supreme combat art. Add to that the many years he'd spent cultivating the 2 sword arts and accumulating experience, and now that he'd sensed the sword intent left behind by the immortal slaying emperor, the transformation had come naturally. Su Zimo himself had mastered many killing techniques. Not only did he know the 3 sword arts, but he also knew the White Tiger's Corpse Devourer, a secret art of extreme killing intent. He was no stranger to the intent of killing. More importantly, Su Zimo had cultivated the wondrous Yin-Yang Talisman Sutra before. One had to know that the inspiration for the 3 sword arts created by the immortal slaying Emperor Lord originated from a passage in the Yin-Yang Talisman Sutra. When the heavens emit killing intent, the stars shift. When the earth emits killing intent, dragons and snakes rise. When the heavens emit killing intent, heaven and earth are overturned. Su Zimo had also read the complete Yin-Yang Talisman Sutra. His understanding of that passage was not inferior to the immortal slaying Emperor Lord. Coupled with the 3 sword arts and the killing sword intent left behind by the immortal slaying Emperor Lord, it was only a matter of time before Su Zimo comprehended the supreme combat art, Immortal Slaying Sword. On the mountain peak, Brother Lu, make a guess. Between Lin Xuanzhen, Kitsune, and Yun Ting, who would comprehend the Immortal Slaying Sword first? We've already placed our bets. Lu Yun shook his head. It's not that easy to comprehend a supreme combat art. It'll be very difficult for the 3 of them to comprehend it in a short amount of time. Who can say for certain something so far away? It'll take thousands, if not tens of thousands of years to determine the victor. The elemental sword peak master nodded as well. Brother Lu's words make sense. In my opinion, let's change the bet. It'll be best if we can determine the victor as soon as possible. That's easy. The Overlord Sword Peak Master smiled. Let's bet on how long Su Zhu can last under the Sword Slayer Peak Sword intent. All right. That's a good idea. The eyes of the other Peak Masters lit up. The Mirage Sword Peak Master said, if I remember correctly, Lin Xuanzhen, Yun Ting, and Kitsune lasted a full 6 hours before they were forced to withdraw. This Su Zhu definitely won't be able to last 6 hours. He'll have a good Dao heart if he can last 2 hours, said the Great Sword Peak Master. I'll bet an hour. In my opinion, he'll last 15 minutes at most. You're underestimating him too much. I bet he can last 2 hours. The 8 Peak Masters placed their bets and chatted casually as they waited. Time passed slowly. 15 minutes, an hour, 2 hours passed in the blink of an eye. Su Zimo was still comprehending and hadn't moved at all. We were all wrong. It looks like Brother Lu has won. The Peak Masters looked at each other and shook their heads with wry smiles. Of the 8 Peak Masters, only Lu Yun guessed that Su Zimo could last 4 hours. In fact, he didn't think much of Su Zimo to begin with. However, after interacting with Su Zimo just now, his intuition told him that this young man wasn't simple. 4 hours passed in the blink of an eye. Su Zimo was still comprehending below. I didn't expect this kid to last this long. We've all made a mistake this time. The 8 Peak Masters remained relaxed and chuckled softly. As time passed by, the smiles on the faces of the 8 Peak Masters lessened. At that moment, 6 hours had passed and there were still no signs of Su Zimo leaving. The 8 Peak Masters looked at each other with solemn expressions. The 5 Elements Sword Peak's Peak Master said, "This kid's Dao heart is indeed strong. To think that he's comparable to Lin Xuanzhen and the other 2. The other Peak Masters remained silent. Right now, it was no longer a matter of being comparable. If Su Zimo continued comprehending, he would definitely surpass Lin Xuanzhen and the other 2. 8 hours passed. Su Zimo's eyes were still closed and he did not move at all. 10 hours passed. At that moment, Sword Crafting Peak was shrouded in the darkness of night. However, the 8 figures on the peak did not show any signs of fatigue. All of a sudden, there was a commotion below. Su Zimo opened his eyes and moved. End of chapter. The demonic Sword Peak Lord suddenly said, "Back then, even the immortal Slayer Emperor wasn't able to cultivate the green lotus of good fortune to the 12th stage. But now, Su Zhu has a 12th stage green lotus of good fortune. If we can put it to good use, all 8 of us have a chance of breaking through to Great Emperor." The other 7 Peak Masters all had different expressions when they heard this. Some frowned, some glared, some were surprised, and some were expressionless. Lu Yun stared coldly at the demonic sword peak master. Brother Shui, what are you talking about? Let me remind you, you cultivate the demonic Tao, but don't lose your humanity. Su Zhu is a living person, what do you want to do to him? The great sword peak master also frowned. Brother Shui, your words just now seem to have lost your mind. When Shuemo saw that the other 7 peak masters were looking at him with strange expressions, he hurriedly explained, I was just speaking casually. It was just a thought that flashed through my mind. I won't really do anything to him. Lu Yun said in a low voice, we've cultivated the sword Dao for many years and uphold the righteous path in our hearts. We act with a clear conscience. We shouldn't even have such thoughts. Exactly. The other peak masters nodded in agreement. Chapter 2765. Lu Yun swept his gaze over the area and frowned when he saw countless figures hurrying in their direction. The commotion here is too great. Even the sword cultivators of Sword Catcher Peak have been alerted. I'll go down and guard him in case anything happens. Protecting Su Zimo was only one of the reasons. He was also worried that something would happen to Su Zimo during the process of being imbued with the power of the ultimate combat art. If that happened, Qinglian's bloodline would be exposed. This was a matter of great importance, so much so that he had to report it to the Myriad Swords Palace's great emperors. The 8 peak lords leapt down from Sword Catcher Peak at the same time and surrounded Su Zimo in the blink of an eye. They continuously deployed their arts and formed an impenetrable barrier of sword qi around him. Not only could no living being barge in, but even the eyes and consciousness of bystanders couldn't penetrate the barrier. Su Zimo was in the midst of being baptized by Altus, but he remained clear-headed and could still sense the commotion around him. Su Zimo frowned slightly when he saw the 8 peak lords appear at the same time. Why would the 8 peak lords be alarmed just because he'd comprehended a supreme combat art? That didn't make sense. Thankfully, his spiritual perception hadn't warned him and the 8 peak lords didn't seem to be hostile toward him. Su Zimo didn't act rashly either. If my guess is right, young friend Su Zhu's bloodline should be that of the 12th rank Fortune Realm Qinglian. Right then, Lu Yun's voice sounded in Su Zimo's ears. Su Zimo's heart skipped a beat. He'd indeed lost some blood just now, but it was difficult for others to determine that he was Qinglian based on the blood on his body. After all, Qinglian's bloodline didn't have any special aura and didn't look any different. Su Zimo didn't know what had gone wrong. He also couldn't predict what kind of change would occur in the sword world if a 12th rank Fortune Realm Qinglian was exposed. In truth, Su Zimo had a very good impression of the sword world after 3 years of interaction. The sword cultivators of the world were straightforward and upright. Even when dealing with an outsider like him, they always treated him with respect. Even when people came to challenge him in the beginning, they always adhered to the principle of fair competition. However, Qinglian was the only one in the world, not to mention that she had already grown to her peak state. How many people could remain unmoved by such a treasure? While Su Zimo was lost in thought, Lu Yun's voice sounded again. Don't worry, young friend Su Zhu. The 8 of us mean you no harm. You can cultivate without worry. Exactly. The peak master of the ultimate sword peak also said, Creation Qinglian has a deep fate with our sword world. We won't harm you on account of the immortal Slayer Emperor. Were the 2 peak masters sincere? In addition, his spiritual perception did not give him any warning, so Su Zimo gradually relaxed. Judging from the current situation, what if the 8 peak masters really wanted to harm him? Since he had no chance to escape, why not just cultivate in peace? First, he would take control of the immortal exterminating sword and complete the transformation. Wang Tong and the other swordsmen had arrived at the back of the sword-slaying peak. Seeing the 8 peak masters guarding a sword qi barrier at first glance? What was the situation inside? No one else could see it. What's going on? Wang Tong asked in a low voice. Which sword cultivator comprehended immortal eradication? Were they late? Those who'd been at the foot of the sword-slaying peak at the beginning should know what was going on. A sword cultivator said, Junior Sister Darknortha's master? Taoist Su Zhu? Su Zhu. Wang Dong and the group of sword cultivators who came later were shocked when they heard this name. They'd guessed a few names on their way here. No one had expected it to be Su Zhu who'd comprehended immortal eradication. Is it really Su Zhu? One of the swordsmen still found it hard to believe. Indeed. Another responded. Was it the Peak Master who brought Su Zhu here? Su Zhu spent 10 hours at the foot of the sword-slaying peak? He directly comprehended a peerless combat art. 10 hours. Wang Tong and the others clicked their tongues. Sword cultivators like them couldn't even last 2 hours at the foot of the sword-slaying peak. What's going on now? Wang Tong looked at the 8 peak masters nearby and asked in a low voice. Taoist Su Zhu comprehended immortal eradication. Why are the 8 peak masters here to protect him? Half a year ago, he was the only peak master who'd appeared when Kitsune attracted her 9x9 heavenly tribulation. The fact that Su Zhu had comprehended immortal eradication was shocking enough, but he was still an outsider. Why would the 8 peak masters show up in person to protect him? I'm not sure either, said a sword cultivator. Su Zhu was receiving the baptism of a peerless combat art and was slightly injured. The 8 peak masters showed up not long after. Many of the sword cultivators found it strange, but didn't think too much of it. They assumed that Su Zhu's sudden comprehension of immortal eradication had attracted the attention of the 8 peak masters. It looks like Taoist Su Zhu will be joining our sect from now on. Wang Tong smiled as if he'd seen through the 8 peak masters' intentions. Daybreak arrived. Su Zimo had just completed the baptism of a peerless combat art. His essence, spirit, and spirit had risen to a whole new level. He'd just broken through to the celestial realm, and the baptism of the peerless combat art had increased his cultivation to the point where it was comparable to 1,000 years of cultivation. Thank you for your protection, seniors. Su Zimo cupped his hands in thanks to the 8 peak masters. Lu Yun smiled. Since you're the bearer of Qinglian's bloodline, you can rest assured that we'll do our best to protect you in the sword world. Among the 3,000 worlds, the sword world is a super major world. Although it's not as large as the world of celestials, it's not far behind in terms of strength. Even if that so-called patriarch of the Academy divines that you're here, he won't dare cause trouble in the sword world. Lu Yun's words filled Su Zimo with a trace of warmth that he hadn't felt in a long time. Ever since his ascension, he'd been constantly on edge and hunted down everywhere. Even after joining the Cosmos Academy, he hadn't been able to escape danger. Only now did Su Zimo feel slightly at ease. Senior, what's this super major world you're talking about? Su Zimo asked. Lu Yun explained, in a medium world, the strength of a world has little to do with its territory. As long as there are more than 10 imperial emperors, it's considered a super major world. Chapter 2767. When Su Zimo had first obtained the sword canon, he had sensed that the scripture on this page was profound and complicated. It probably originated from some extremely superior cultivation method. At that time, he had used the spirit potency art. His 2 true bodies had read the remnant pages of the sword canon at the same time. Although they had comprehended some of it, it was impossible for them to comprehend any Taoist arts just by relying on some incoherent and incomplete scriptures. If even his 2 true bodies could not comprehend it, it was even more impossible for others. Otherwise, that page would not have been casually placed in the Academy's secret pavilion. Now that Su Zimo had the opportunity to comprehend the complete Daluo sword canon, he felt completely different. He had gained a sliver of understanding from reading the incomplete sword canon back then. Su Zimo looked at the Daluo sword steel with deep eyes. He held the Bodhi seed in his hand and gradually immersed his mind within. There was naturally no need to elaborate on the Daluo sword canon. By great, it meant extremely vast. It meant boundless. By net, it meant encompassing everything. By Daluo, it meant boundless and encompassing everything. This sword canon was the culmination of the Tao of the sword. It encompassed everything. As a result, every sword cultivator who came to the Daluo sword steel to comprehend the sword canon could comprehend a different Tao of the sword according to their own Taoist techniques. While Kitsune cultivated beneath sword slaughtering peak, her Tao of the sword was a school of its own. It was clearly different from the 8 great Taoists of the sword world. Back when Kitsune underwent her 9x9 heavenly tribulation, her Tao of the sword had already begun to take shape. Comprehending the Daluo sword canon this time was an opportunity for her to establish her own Tao of the sword. Su Zimo had not spent too much time and effort on the Tao of the sword since he started cultivating. His cultivation was vast and varied, including the Taoists, Buddhists, demons, and Taoists. The Tao of the sword was only one of the branches. He had come into contact with the 3 great sword arts the most. Comprehending the 3 great sword arts to the extreme would give birth to the slaughter Tao of the sword. The one he had the most opportunity to comprehend and also the easiest to comprehend was the slaughter Tao of the sword. The Tao of the sword also contained the profundities of all Taoists. On the other hand, slaughter was undoubtedly the profundity that best represented the sword Tao. Su Zimo and Kitsune sat in front of the Daluo sword steel. Sword chi revolved around them as they read the same secret scriptures on the Tao of the sword, comprehending different mysteries of the Tao of the sword. Kitsune's aura became more and more profound and mysterious. She was like a black hole in the starry sky that was constantly absorbing and swallowing. On the other hand, Su Zimo's aura became stronger and stronger. It was sharp and filled with killing intent. Lu Yun nodded to himself when he saw this. The massacring sword intent emanating from Su Zimo was already extremely pure. Moreover, he had already comprehended the immortal slaying sword. By comprehending the Daluo sword mantra, it was very likely that he would be able to make further progress in his Tao of the sword of slaughter. As for Kitsune, it was a little strange. Even the 8 peak masters had never seen her sword Tao before. If the current Su Zimo was an unsheathed sword with a threatening edge, no one could ignore his existence. Then, Bai Mingshue's surroundings would be empty. It was as if all matter had been devoured by her sword Tao and vanished without a trace. From the looks of it, Kitsune may be about to create a new sword Tao, the great sword peak master transmitted through his consciousness. Lu Yun nodded slightly.